Pursuant to House Resolution 8, today the committee is meeting virtually. I want to announce a couple of reminders to the members about the conduct of this remote hearing. First, members need to keep their video feed on as long as they are present in the hearing. Members are responsible also for their own microphone. Please also keep your microphones muted unless you are speaking. If members have documents they wish to submit for the record, please email them to the committee clerk whose email address was circulated prior to the hearing. Good morning, and thank you all for joining our virtual hearing on examining the advancement of scientific research for the future of U.S. innovation through the National Science Foundation. I'm speaking to you today from the Oakland County Commission chambers, a few short miles from Oakland University, home of the School of Engineering and Computer Science, and a proud recipient of over $9 million NSF dollars that they are using for active projects for stem cell biology, cybersecurity capacity, and STEM education. It is just one snapshot here at Oakland University of the incredible impact that the NSF makes through their $8.5 billion budget. I want to thank Dr. Panchanathan and Dr. Ochoa for testifying today and bringing your passion, your expertise, your dedication to the leading scientific research agency for the United States of America. And welcome virtually to all of today's participants, committee members, to Oakland County, Michigan, where we proudly boast the largest robot, just again, a couple miles down the road at Fanuc, from the destination I'm sitting right now. I'm also in the hub of innovators and makers that have been long connected to the National Science Foundation. I also want to take a minute to welcome my colleague, Mr. Mike Waltz, the ranking member of research and the Research and Technology Subcommittee. This is his first hearing as the ranking member, and we welcome him to this new role, and certainly recognizing the linkages that my state, Michigan, shares, starting with I-75, which is just a pinch outside of his district in eastern Florida, which includes Daytona Beach. We have an enormous topic before us here today, and we are preparing as a subcommittee a rigorous effort to determine the course of how we will exercise the full weight of the U.S. scientific research agenda and continue to lead the world in terms of emerging technologies and economies of scale. We are here today to examine, but also determine a course of action and a vision for a rapidly advancing future of the United States and our innovation agenda. We are also here to ensure that NSF and to evaluate the funding, the adequate funding needed for the National Science Foundation. While we await the president's full budget, his priorities are more than clear. The proposed 20% increase to the National Science Foundation budget has the potential to unleash more scientific research, scientists working with their students to study the changing climate, advancing our nation's efforts in artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and so much more, including our continued response to the COVID-19 pandemic and our efforts to usher in an equity agenda for all scientists and potential scientists around the country. Our hearing is also going to be a part of how we will utilize the National Science Foundation to overall assist the U.S. scientific enterprise and further R&D efforts along with technology transfer. I am proud to co-sponsor with Chairwoman Eddie Bernice Johnson, Ranking Member Lucas, Ranking Member Mike Waltz, and several other of my committee colleagues, the NSF for the Future Act. This bill was developed over a period of time with our stakeholders, policy leaders, additional experts, obviously with a lot of weigh-in from the NSF, to create a piece of legislation that is comprehensive in reauthorizing the priorities of leveraging NSF's strengths and protecting its core mission that has been in place since the 1950s. The legislation, the NSF for the Future Act, seeks to advance and scale up innovations in pre-K, through 12 STEM education and ensure STEM students are prepared to enter the workforce. Our workforce agenda and our connection to the NSF couldn't be more of an imperative here. And we are also focused on training the next generation of researchers and innovators, and certainly with an overall accountability of the National Science Foundation to the public. The transparency couldn't be more important. New requirements in this bill would address threats to research security and ensure researchers are thinking through the societal impacts of their work while continuing to dominate on open source platforms and meeting supply chain needs, our supply chain recovery. The NSF for the Future Act proposes a new directorate for science and engineering solutions. While technology plays a key role in the directorate, it is certainly not its singular focus. Instead, the NSF for the Future Act charges NSF with engaging broadly with both traditional and non-traditional partners in academia, industry, civic organizations, and local communities and governments to identify a myriad of societal challenges that are ripe for research-driven solutions and partnerships to pursue that research. Scientists, take note. We want to hear from you. The reason we are pursuing this direction is that we have the need and the opportunity to increase funding for basic and fundamental research in the United States of America. Our Senate Commerce Committee Chair Marie Cantwell, recently held a hearing talking about just this point, how we are at some of our lowest levels in research funding while the rest of the world is moving forward and advancing very aggressively on scientific research. 70 years of investments have enabled the United States to lead the world in science and innovation, compete in the global economy, and protect also the health and security of its citizens. We could not applaud the NSF more for your critical role in the COVID-19 response. And there is a long list of investments and research spend that you have conducted once this pandemic began. And we cannot, again, thank you enough for your efforts in that regard. So with that, and in conclusion, we are going to be engaging in a robust dialogue today, and I would also at this time like to recognize Mr. Waltz for his opening statement.
Hey, thank you, Chairwoman Stevens, and it's great to join you from the other end of I-75. It's sunny and beautiful. I'm joining you from the headquarters of NASCAR, but just down the street from Embry-Riddle University, which has also benefited greatly from NSF grants, and really look forward to having the president of Embry-Riddle join us for our next hearing, Dr. Butler. So I want to thank Dr. Panchanathan and Dr. Ochoa as well for your participation today. Looking forward to hearing your testimony and thoughts on where the future of the NSF is headed. As we all know, but I think it's always worth restating, since its creation in 1950, the National Science Foundation really has served a unique role among federal agencies, given its broad mission. I think it's worth quoting of, quote, promoting the progress of science to advance the national health, prosperity, and welfare, and to secure the national defense, end quote. So in bringing this mission to life, NSF supports basic research, fuels major technological innovations, including smartphones, GPS, internet, new research disciplines, supports and trains generations of scientists and engineers that are critical for our future economy and for our national defense. The investments in science and technology truly are drivers of economic growth. Numerous studies have concluded as much as 85% of the long-term growth in America's economy is attributed to advancements in science and technology. And for decades, America has led the world in science and technology innovation. But as the pace of innovation is accelerating, global competition, we all know, has increased. And the United States, to be completely candid, is losing its edge. The Chinese Communist Party poses an especially formidable and growing strategic challenge to our way of life and to American leadership around the world. Today, the U.S. is really at an inflection point. And it's crucial for us to make strategic investments to build up our R&D enterprise. I think there is absolutely bipartisan agreement to that point. There is momentum on both sides of the aisle to make these investments, but it must be done in a realistic and sustained way. I am proud to be an original co-sponsor of the NSF for the Future Act with Chairwoman Johnson, Ranking Member Lucas, Chairwoman Stevens. This bill increases funding for fundamental research, improves STEM education and research training. It creates a new directorate, as Chairwoman Stevens mentioned, creates a new directorate in S&T within the agency. But most importantly, it does not detract from the agency's core mission of advancing basic scientific knowledge. So we agree we must make these investments, but I just can't emphasize enough, we must also secure taxpayer-funded research and technologies from adversaries, especially from the Chinese Communist Party. And while the NSF for the Future Act includes some provisions to increase research security, I look forward to working with Chairwoman Stevens. I appreciate her collaboration on this, and Chairwoman Johnson, to build upon these provisions and to improve best practices, to provide tougher safeguards to prevent research theft and foreign influence. Our federal agencies, like the NSF, also need the tools and authority to reject grant applications from known participants in malign foreign talent recruitment programs. Those authorities are absolutely critical, and I look forward to working with you on that. In addition to my work in this committee, I also serve on the Armed Services Committee and regularly receive intelligence on the Chinese Communist Party and how they are leapfrogging the U.S. Technologically and militarily through intellectual property theft. We cannot allow the CCP to advance its authoritarianism on the backs of American taxpayer-funded research. I'm encouraged that Democrats on both committees share these concerns, and they have an interest in addressing undue foreign influence, as illustrated by the April 9th letter, which I thought was fantastic, from Chairs Johnson, Smith, Stevens, and Langevin to President Biden. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses how the foundation is addressing the challenges of research security, how we can build upon Congress's previous efforts to safeguard America's IP and confront the CCP's wholesale theft of our research institutions. As we make these investments, we must continue and should also ensure we avoid duplicating the R&D activities in other federal agencies. As part of the president's recent $2.3 trillion infrastructure proposal, more than $200 billion is tagged for research and development focused activities, but there really isn't a clear directive for how these funds will be used or coordinated. The president is messaging this as a way, this $200 billion as a way to compete with China, but I would argue that we will not beat China by copying its strategy. So strategic investments in technologies are important, but creating the potential of creating a one-time slush fund could end up doing more harm than good. I think instead, we should look at proposals like the Securing American Leadership in Science and Technology Act, the SALSTA Act, which creates a national S&T strategy, doubles funding for basic research across federal science agencies over 10 years, or the NSF for the Future Act, which I mentioned previously. While not a whole of government approach, this bill has been thoughtfully developed to protect NSF's core mission and more than doubles the amount of research it will support over 5 years. Both proposals include long-term planning to make investments in STEM workforce, facilities, and research needed to develop state-of-the-art technologies, though these investments, through these investments, American research, American innovations, and American workforce will continue to lead the world. I look forward to working with both Chairwoman Johnson and Stevens, Ranking Member Lucas, to move the NSF for the Future Act through the committee on a bipartisan basis and to the House floor in consideration. I also look forward to working with the leadership of NSF and the National Science Board. Again, I want to thank you both for being here, for your leadership, and for participating in this hearing. Chairwoman Stevens, I yield the balance of my time. Thanks so much.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And we know our full committee chairwoman, Johnson, is in full support of today's hearing and has also been obviously a true leader in terms of where we're going to take the effort with the National Science Foundation. So as we might have remarks from her for the record, we will plan to submit that. But for now, I would like to recognize Ranking Member Mr. Lucas for an opening statement.
Thank you, Chairwoman Stevens and Ranking Member Waltz, for holding today's hearing on the future of the National Science Foundation and its role in advanced American innovation. The National Science Foundation was created in 1950 at the start of the Cold War, when America's global leadership and prosperity was under threat from Soviet Russia and the rise of communism. Congress established the NSF with a mission of funding basic research and STEM education to promote the progress of science, advance the national health, prosperity, welfare, and secure the national defense. NSF was just one part of a strategy to invest in America's scientific capacities. That period also saw the creation of NASA, of the Department of Energy and the National Laboratories, the Department of Defense Laboratories. It's a research ecosystem that has been the envy of the world and given our nation great prosperity and technological achievements. But 70 years later, we face a new generational threat in the rise of China. Communist Chinese leadership is investing more in research than the US and aggressively pursuing technological supremacy through foreign acquisitions, forced technology transfers, and frequently cyber espionage. We also face enormous national and societal changes like cybersecurity threats, the growth of AI and automation, the need for exceptional computing capacity, and a climate that is changing. At the same time, science is becoming multidisciplinary, which we need to address and leverage. And we need to improve the diversity of our scientific workforce and ensure all Americans have opportunities to participate and excel in STEM education and employment. And yet our research enterprise remains one of the best in the world. We must maintain and strengthen the foundations that made it so successful. The question before us today is, how do we grow and evolve NSF to meet the challenges of the 21st century while preserving what makes NSF great? It was with these challenges and opportunities in mind that I was proud to join Chairwoman Johnson in introducing the NSF for the Future Act. Our legislation doubles down on basic research funding at NSF over the next 5 years. It focuses on building our domestic STEM workforce while also creating a new directorate of NSF focused on science and engineering solutions. Importantly, we're working to improve how we apply discoveries in the lab to solve national and societal challenges. The NSF for the Future Act is a result of months of stakeholder engagement, hearings, and bipartisan discussions. Today's hearing with the leadership of NSF and the National Science Board, as well as next week's hearing with the NSF stakeholders, continues that open, transparent, and inclusive process of reauthorizing the foundation. This is how the legislative process should work. But the NSF alone can't meet the scientific challenges ahead. Earlier this month, I introduced the Security, American Leadership, and Science and Technology Act, which comprehensively invests in research across many federal agencies, driving scientific progress. My legislation creates a national science and technology strategy, doubles basic research funding over the next 10 years, invests in our scientific infrastructure, improves technological transfer from lab to market, and protects American research from theft by foreign emissaries. We have a unique window of opportunity before us. There is momentum on both sides of the aisle in the House and the Senate for legislation to secure our global science and technology leadership. But it should be a comprehensive strategy and sustainable. A $100 billion slush fund for a top-down approach to developing technologies, as some have proposed, does not meet that criteria. Instead, America's continued scientific leadership requires a comprehensive and strategic approach to research and development, one that is responsible and sustainable. It requires a national collaboration and public-private partnerships and a focus on evolving technologies that are crucial to our national and economic security, like semiconductors and quantum sciences. I also agree with many of my colleagues that we need to do more to ensure STEM opportunities reach more Americans. We need to make sure investment doesn't just go to places like, and no offense to my friends, San Francisco and Boston, or the top 10 universities, but also in places like Stillwater, Oklahoma, and land-grant institutions like Oklahoma State, and historically Black colleges and universities like Langston University. I look forward to hearing ideas about how we can better achieve that goal. I'm committed to working with my colleagues on the Science Committee, the Senate Committees of Jurisdiction, and stakeholders to move legislation that is as bold and as ambitious as the greatest scientific minds in our country. But we also have the responsibility to ensure our solutions offer a sustainable path forward for the U.S. research enterprise. Innovation thrives on stable and predictable funding, and our nation's students, scientists, and research institutions depend on it. I thank our witnesses for being here today. I very much look forward to their testimony. And with that, Madam Chair, I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you, Mr. Lucas. And if there are members who wish to submit additional opening statements, your statements will be added to the record at this point. At this time, I'd also like to introduce our incredible witnesses. Our first witness is Dr. Sethuraman Panchanathan. Dr. Panchanathan is a computer scientist and engineer currently serving as the 15th director of the National Science Foundation, a position he has held since June of 2020. Prior to his service as director, he was executive vice president of the Arizona State University Knowledge Enterprise, where he was also chief research and innovation officer. Prior to joining the National Science Foundation, Dr. Panchanathan served on the National Science Board as chair of the Committee on Strategy and as a member of the External Engagement and National Science and Engineering Policy Committees. Additionally, he served on the National Advisory Council on Innovation and Entrepreneurship and was chair of the Council on Research of the Association of Public Land Grant Universities. Our second witness is Dr. Ellen Ochoa. Dr. Ochoa is currently the chair of the National Science Board, a position to which she was elected in 2020, having previously served as vice chair from 2018 to 2020. Dr. Ochoa retired from federal service in 2018 as director of NASA's Johnson Space Center, which leads the human spaceflight enterprise for the nation. Dr. Ochoa is the first Hispanic female astronaut and served as a crew member on 4 space shuttle missions in a variety of roles, including leading onboard scientific activities and serving as a flight engineer during the launch, rendezvous, and entry phases of the mission. She began her career as a research engineer at Sandia National Laboratories and NASA's Ames Research Center. As our witnesses should know, you will each have 5 minutes of testimony. Your written testimony, which both of your written testimonies were incredible, will be included into the record for the hearing. When you've completed your spoken testimony, we'll begin questions, and each member will have 5 minutes to question the panel. We will start with Dr. Panchanathan. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and good afternoon and good morning, wherever you are. Chairwoman Johnson, Chairwoman Stevens, Ranking Member Lucas, Ranking Member Waltz, and members of the subcommittee. It is an honor to appear before you today to discuss how NSF can accelerate innovation at speed and scale for the benefit of all Americans. I would like to start by thanking this committee for the strong support for NSF, which has enabled remarkable benefits for our nation. I would also like to thank Congress for the funding provided in the CARES Act and the American Rescue Plan. The pandemic has had a profound impact on the research community. NSF will invest these funds wisely, helping the most severely impacted and most vulnerable. For over 7 decades, NSF has played a leading role in building US leadership in science, engineering, and technology, and has an incredibly strong record of investing in the brightest minds and outstanding ideas. The internet, 3D printing, the economic theory underpinning spectrum auctioning and kidney exchanges, companies like Qualcomm, and even PCR testing, which has been critical to the fight against COVID-19, are just a few examples of the outcomes and benefits of NSF investments. For the first time in decades, the United States leadership in science and engineering is facing intense global competition. Other nations, especially China, are investing vast resources in basic research and the industries of the future, like artificial intelligence. Advances in technologies like AI, quantum information science, and even the technologies we cannot yet conceive of will influence the global balance of power for generations. The United States needs to take a comprehensive approach to R&D investment that brings science, engineering, and technology innovations to market much more rapidly. We must commit ourselves to this challenge so that we are leaping forward and ensuring that the race for global leadership is not even close. Doing so requires tightly integrating curiosity-driven research and use-inspired outcomes. That is why we have crafted a bold vision for the agency. First, we must advance the frontiers of science and engineering research into the future. Second, we must ensure accessibility and inclusivity in STEM. There is tremendous untapped potential throughout our nation. Every demographic and socioeconomic group in every geographic region is full of talent and must be inspired and given the opportunity to participate in STEM. Finally, America must lead by our actions and our values. We will work with like-minded partners, and we will take the necessary steps to safeguard taxpayer investments. The foundation for this vision is partnerships. They are powerful tools to leverage resources and deliver more impactful results. NSF has a history of cultivating and fostering environments where partnerships thrive. The American Jobs Plan and the FY22 discretionary request propose strong investments in research and development. This includes a $50 billion investment in NSF, creating a new technology directorate, and a 20% increase to NSF's budget in FY22. This increase will strengthen NSF's ability to champion the basic research that is critical to our future. In addition, we know there are opportunities for translational impact in all science and engineering fields that hold enormous potential benefits. The proposed directorate will be a cross-cutting platform that leverages, energizes, and rapidly brings these innovations to market. NSF will not abandon our current mission or be redundant with other mission agencies. We all know we have a large gap in bringing fantastic innovative ideas to market and society. This is our opportunity to rapidly change that. The budget request also invests in increasing the participation of underrepresented groups in science and engineering, which is exceedingly important for our nation. NSF greatly appreciates the strong support for the agency's current mission that is evident throughout the NSF for the Future Act. The focus on STEM education, broadening participation, strengthening fundamental research, and intensifying our focus on innovation to address urgent needs aligns well with the agency's vision for the future. We look forward to working with the committee as it progresses. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. With the continued support of this committee and Congress, NSF will bolster fundamental research across all fields of science and engineering and unleash rapid innovations, securing our future for generations to come. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you. And with that, we'll recognize Dr. Ochoa.
Thank you so much. Chairwoman Stevens, Ranking Member Waltz, members of the subcommittee, and full committee Chairwoman Johnson and Ranking Member Lucas. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you as chair of the National Science Board. U.S. leadership in science and engineering has shaped our way of life, economic prosperity, and national security for 7 decades. When my predecessor testified before you last year, she said, "The past has shown that investment in basic research now will give us the keys to meeting the security, health, and economic challenges of the future. Challenges we know will arise, but whose nature we cannot predict." How prescient those words proved to be, thanks in no small part to that federal investment. We're beginning to emerge from a devastating pandemic. Urgent trends led the board to develop a vision for what the U.S. needs to do to remain preeminent. Our Vision 2030 report provides a roadmap for reinventing our science and engineering enterprise and ways to build on NSF's strengths and success. The time is right to invest in science, technology, and talent at the scale of our nation's challenges, and NSF is the right agency for the job. I'll focus on 2 priorities that we all share: delivering benefits from research and developing domestic STEM talent. First, we must speed the path from discovery to innovation and impact. In Vision 2030, NSB highlighted the need for a new structure to magnify the translation of discoveries. The board is gratified by the confidence placed in NSF by Congress and the administration to expand the agency's role in delivering benefits through technology and translation, along with increased investment in fundamental research. As there are now multiple proposals, the board offers these principles for your consideration. We believe any new directorate should work synergistically with the existing ones, strengthen NSF's basic research mission, and create robust feedback loops to couple its work to the current discipline-oriented directorates. A structure that's clear and consistent with existing practices, including maintaining the board's governance role, will help ensure its cross-cutting nature. Continued programmatic agility will be crucial. And finally, funding for any new directorate will need to include support for people and operations. In that vein, the board appreciates that the NSF for the Future Act includes provisions that would help connect the curiosity-driven and use-inspired research across the agency, creating opportunities to address societal problems. We appreciate the flexibility for the agency to experiment with new models, funding mechanisms, and nimble processes. And we applaud the bill's focus on talent development, especially diverse domestic talent. And this leads to our second shared priority. Talent is the treasure on which the nation's prosperity, health, and security depend. For the U.S. to be a STEM powerhouse, we must capitalize on talent in every state and recruit the missing millions from across the many dimensions of diversity. That's why the NSB applauds the legislation's support for networks and partnerships that scale up effective practices in broadening participation. The board also appreciates financial support directly to students, such as through NSF's graduate research fellowships, which is critical to retention. NSF is only one piece. Much more needs to be done across the entire ecosystem to provide more on-ramps into the workforce and improve the attractiveness, equity, and inclusivity of STEM careers. And we must improve our nation's K-12 STEM education. The board believes there's an opportunity to support broad adoption and use of NSF-funded STEM education research where it's needed most, in classrooms. To conclude, NSB is excited to partner with the NSF director, with Congress and the administration to realize our vision for the future, one where NSF continues to drive U.S. innovation and delivers benefits to all Americans. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you both. And at this point, we will begin our first round of questions, and the chair will recognize herself for 5 minutes. Dr. Panchanathan, if you don't mind, could you just give us your best definition of basic scientific research and to the ability you are able to, can you give us the percentage of NSF grant funding that goes towards basic scientific research, if you happen to have that figure available?
So what is basic research is not necessarily anything that has an objective that we keep in mind as we are investigating the fundamental theories and fundamental approaches of any branch of science or engineering. And that we are able to do it because it is a curiosity-driven approach, it's a discovery-based approach, and that it is purely explorative in nature. That's what we would term as basic research. If you look at NSF, and I often define it as the DNA of NSF being this twin strands of curiosity-driven, discovery-based exploratory research, highly synergistic with use-inspired, solutions-focused translations or innovations. These are highly synergistic and symbiotic. Sometimes it's even hard to peel them apart. In some cases, it's obvious. In some cases, they are so intertwined that's even hard to peel them apart. So I would say a majority of the focus of NSF is on fundamental research. And some of that do end up becoming outcome-oriented results through programs and projects, surely, but some see them over decades, some see them even over a few years. And I'm happy to give you examples. In the interest of time,
and I'll jump back in here because I, as a former NSF applicant myself, right, we get into this, how do we get the best proposals? How do we get to the pathway of getting funded? I was an applicant, but I didn't get funded, right? That's not my question. But what leads to the pathway of getting an NSF grant? What goes into that? And also evaluating, and I'm going to throw in two more, and Dr. Ochoa, if you want to jump in, is what leads to the pathway of getting funded, and looking at, if we're only funding a certain percentage, what are we not funding and why, and should we? And then three, we can't ignore the reality that this pandemic has really impeded our research endeavors, and in terms of being in the lab and accessing equipment. The NIH has talked about billions of dollars of lost scientific or lost research funding from their side of it. And I don't know if we've experienced that with the NSF. So if we could address those components here, that'd be really helpful as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I will try to quickly address this. I mean, you asked for a percentage in the previous question. I just want to make sure that I laid it out clearly. 64% is basic research, 10% is applied research. And so I just want to make sure that you had those numbers with you. Yeah. You brought up the issue of, how might we take the COVID situation at hand? There are multiple questions in your main question. So I don't know whether we'll have time to deal with all of that, but I'm happy to come back and talk about this and to make sure that we are comprehensive in our response. Yeah. On the COVID response, we have put a lot of effort, and I will elaborate that in terms of specific details. But I will tell you that this has become a huge priority for us in terms of ensuring that our scientists, researchers, research, innovations, and innovators are fully supported in two categories: those who have been disproportionately affected, those institutions that have also been disproportionately affected, individuals and institutions. And we are putting a heavy emphasis on that to ensure that we are taking care of them. I'm happy to provide more details in response.
Sure. And certainly the scientific research went forward. And Dr. Jim Baird, committee member, and I were really pleased to get signed into law at the end of 2019 in the 116th session of Congress, the building blocks of STEM Act, which places an emphasis on early childhood education, a requirement of the National Science Foundation to begin funding STEM grants with a particular emphasis on young girls. I know you've already been doing a few of those grants, but certainly would like to continue to achieve that equity and inclusion measure with STEM, and your awareness and understanding of that is highly recognized. So I know I've got about 20 seconds left, but Dr. Ochoa, did you want to chime in on anything that we've just briefly mentioned before I cede back my time?
Thank you. Talking about the pathways to funding, the board has a role in the oversight of the merit review process that the National Science Foundation does. And of course, all those proposals need to address intellectual merit as well as broader impacts which are how this research or the activity that the principal investigator does, impacts society. And it can be through the research itself, what it's actually working on that may contribute to a societal problem. It can be through activities that are directly related, like including students or early career scientists in the project.
Yeah.
And it can even be through ones that are complementary. So you might have an educational workshop for high school students. So those are some of the things that go along with that people can propose as part of their overall pathway to funding. That is something that the board looks at, how well the foundation has been able to do that in their process.
Great. Thank you so much. And with that, I'm going to recognize Mr. Waltz for 5 minutes of questioning if he is here. Yep, there you are. All right.
We're on the move, but thank you. Dr. Punch, the NSF for the Future Act codifies your Office for Research Security. I've had the opportunity to speak with her. Unfortunately, she is an army of two, and with an overwhelming problem. The IG office is indicating they've had 1,000% increase in referrals from the FBI on research fraud and theft, particularly, as I mentioned in my own opening statement, from Chinese government-backed researchers. In fact, I'm on my way to the University of Florida. They just had an indictment there where a researcher had access for years to the world's largest supercomputer. As soon as they launched the investigation, it crashed their computer systems and he fled to Beijing. I mean, the problem truly is pervasive. Fortunately, and thank you for working with us, Chairwoman Stevens and the committee staff, the NSF for the Future Act increases from, looks like from 2 to 5 in those FTEs. I still think that is just really scratching it really is the tip of the iceberg of the problem. My concern is you're looking at either doubling or in President Biden's infrastructure plan, looking at a 10-fold increase in the amount of funding that will flow to the NSF. What's your vision? And if you could give me specifics, please, I'd appreciate it. Your visions for securing this research. And I fully appreciate and fully support the additional resources. I want to be clear there. But if we're only scratching the tip of the iceberg with what we have now, you go to a 10-fold increase. How do you obligate it? How long does it take you to obligate it? And then how do you secure it going forward?
Thank you so much for the question. So first of all, to the security issue, this representative, this is an evolving issue and we need to make sure that we are balanced in our approach. And so we are making sure that we're putting the right balance in place. So NSF, I want to assure you that NSF is taking this very seriously and devoting resources to it. You pointed out and I'm so grateful to the NSF for the Future Act, providing additional resources. And this is something that we really appreciate, that Congress is identifying the problem and assigning resources to this. This is exceedingly important for that. And you also rightly pointed out that we appointed a chief research officer for research security strategy and policy. Chris, she's working hard, but not alone with a small group, but in partnership with inside the agency, as you know, in all the directorates, working in partnership with other people who are also lending support and a hand to make sure that we are doing this in a comprehensive way, not just centralized in one location in that office alone, because we want to make sure that this works in its fullest form. We are also working in partnership with the IG, and we also pointed that out. And that's another thing that we want to make sure that happens. I want to say that in this process, being an AI researcher myself, the analytic tools are becoming exceedingly powerful in ensuring that we are able to glean this. And however much you provide human element to this, technology can provide us a lot of insights and early warnings and indications that can be had.
If I could just dive in there, I appreciate that, and I think that is fantastic. And the way they're able to overlay grant applications with where they're reporting 0 foreign income or 0 participation in talents, but yet those same researchers are appearing in Chinese or Iranian scientific papers and able to overlay that. But they're also reporting that they just can't possibly follow up on the vast amount of leads that technology is generating. So I appreciate that emphasis, and we'll continue to emphasize that, giving them tools, for example, to be able to request on demand and see the actual contracts that these researchers are entering. But with 40,000 researchers and 12,000 institutions, I think we need continue to have a lot of emphasis. My time remaining, Dr. Ochoa, you stated that the Vision 2030 report is a guide to where U.S. and science engineering enterprise must be in 10 years. And given your experience in developing the roadmap, if you could just submit for the record, since I'm about out of time, your opinion on a proposal that we've included in the Securing American Leadership in Science and Technology Act, the SALSTA Act, to develop a national S&T strategy and quadrennial review like what DoD undertakes. If you could comment for the record on that, and I may have a follow-up with you on that to see a process for a whole of government strategy for S&T that might benefit U.S. competitiveness. I think we could do more on the strategy side of this across the government. And I'd appreciate your input. Thank you so much, Chairwoman. I yield my time.
Thank you. And we talked in our report about supporting, again, both sort of the individual creativity, curiosity-driven research, along with an increased emphasis on delivering benefits. And on that side, a lot of it does have to do with there are particular topics, industries, areas of research that are important to the economy and for which the government as a whole is interested in. And NSF and the board is very interested in making sure that it's a partnership across federal agencies and of bringing in many other partners as well. Obviously, academia, which is where NSF has so many deep relationships, and private industry, and even other partners like foundations. So NSF wants to work with mission-driven federal agencies. Obviously, one role that the Office of Science and Technology Policy have is to really look across those agencies and help ensure that there is an overlap and that there are ties and hooks between what NSF is doing in the basic research area and how that may play into the missions of the other federal agencies.
Dr. Ochoa, if you could just, I know I'm out of time, I'm exceeded, but Dr. Ochoa, if you could submit for the record, specifically your opinion on that proposal in the SALSTA Act for a quadrennial review, which is similar to DoD's process. I'd love to have a follow-up with you on that.
Okay, absolutely. It's not something specifically we've talked about with the board, but we can share our thoughts.
That would be great. Thank you so much, Chairwoman.
Yes.
Great. Thank you. And with that, the chair would like to recognize Mr. Tonko for 5 minutes of questions.
Hey, thank you, Madam Chair, for holding today's critically important hearing. I'm looking forward to working with you and the rest of the members of the Research and Technology Subcommittee this Congress to advance legislation that will help harness the power of our nation's research enterprise to propel innovation and make certain that we have a skilled workforce ready to meet our lofty goals for addressing climate change and fostering an innovation economy. In New York's capital region, which I represent, it's known for being a hub of STEM innovation, thanks to the incredible work of instructors, researchers, and scientists at our world-class colleges and universities. Researchers in my district have made remarkable strides advancing work across the STEM fields in recent years, not only breaking new ground in our scientific understanding, but also inspiring and teaching the next generation of great scientists, engineers, and visionaries. I appreciate both of our witnesses today for joining us this morning and to discuss the role of NSF in these efforts and how Congress can best support the foundation moving forward. So one of the major discussions before this committee is how to best support the idea of expanding the mission of the National Science Foundation to take on a strategic effort to translate the results of basic research into solutions to some of our most pressing societal and existential challenges. So, Dr. Panchanathan, in the creation of any new directorate at NSF, how will you ensure that researchers from all disciplines will be able to apply for and receive funding to help define and pursue a wide variety of research agendas and aims?
Thank you, Representative Tonko, for your question. So when we are thinking about this directorate, we have strong directorates in various scientific disciplines. We all know that at NSF. This directorate that we are proposing is actually a crosscut. It is not an independent directorate, but a crosscut that leverages what is happening currently in the science directorates, but also energizes what is happening in the science directorates, and is able to take out what is happening in the science directorate at speed and at scale so that it might benefit society and the economy at a very rapid rate. This is what we need today when you look at our competition like China, the tight integration. Again, I go back to the DNA example. The tight integration of the technology outcomes and societal outcomes and the scientific inspirations that it is drawing from and contributing to. That is how we visualize this. So to your point, absolutely, this is going to be from every discipline. We are going to look at every possible avenue of innovation being translated for the benefit of society and the economy.
Thank you. And Dr. Ochoa, how do you think a new NSF directorate would impact NSF's mission with regard to a full range of research, including curiosity-driven research and use-inspired and translational research?
Well, we talked, as I mentioned, the features that we felt was important. I'll probably just be copying what Dr. Panchanathan said, which is we wanted to make sure it wasn't siloed, where you create a stovepipe where, over here is a separate directorate that's really looking at delivering benefits. This is something that has happened across the discipline directorates that already exist. And so any new structure that really focuses on delivering benefits should be cross-cutting. And that's also why we emphasize, so not only the integration across the directorate, but the governance model. Again, making sure that you don't have a separate governance model because that would only potentially enhance the stovepipe area. And then flexibility. I think one of the things that has always been a highlight of NSF is they have the ability to invest all across the disciplines, particularly as new and interesting, promising topics come up. And I think that's one of the highlights of a new directorate and the whole agency as well.
Well, with my time left, I'd like to ask both of you if you could share your thoughts on NSF's role in advancing research to solve some of the biggest societal challenges, including climate change, the opioid crisis, and other large-scale, multifaceted challenges, if you would, please.
Thank you again for the question. So, NSF has got these multiple directorates, and usually these challenges, the opioid epidemic challenge, the climate challenge, actually draws from all areas of what we're investing in. Contrary to people may think that it is in one discipline. It's in fact, the best solutions are found at the confluence of disciplines. Let's take climate challenge, for example. It is an engineering problem. It's a computing problem in the modeling sense. It is a geo problem. It is a bio problem. It is a mathematical physical sciences problem. And most importantly, it is a social behavioral science and problem too. Because without that, we cannot have comprehensive and complete solutions to this challenge. So what we're trying to do at NSF, and that's where NSF is very unique as an agency, because we can bring all of the assets across disciplines in order to find real solutions to the problem at hand. And so for the rest of the time, I would like to yield to Dr. Ochoa.
In addition to what Dr. Panchanathan just said, obviously there are other federal agencies that invest in science and are trying to understand some of these issues, in particular when you think about climate research and climate science. So Dr. Panchanathan has put so much effort in the last several months where he's been director to reaching out to the leads of federal agencies and talking about where can they partner even closer. Obviously, NSF has always partnered with other agencies, but really bringing up to a very strategic level, maybe above the level of just certain research topics. And I think that's a big part of going forward and how NSF can be successful in addressing society challenges, marrying up their basic research mission and their deep reach into the higher education institutions, close to 2,000 of them across the country, and bringing that to solving these problems.
Thank you very much. Madam Chair, I yield back. I'm sorry I went well over time.
Thank
but
you.
I'm sorry.
Thank you. Well, we're packing in the questions. I think we're each doing 5 minutes. Sometimes we do a second round, but this is heavy stuff. And with that, we're going to recognize Ranking Member Lucas for his 5 minutes. Thank you. Thanks for being here.
Thank you, Chairwoman. Absolutely. And to both our panelists, as you know, the United States and China approach funding, research, and development very differently. The U.S. government has traditionally focused on making investments in basic research, which leads to unexpected outcomes that are then adopted and developed by U.S. industry. We also have diverse mission agencies that focus on more than transitional or applied research in energy, transportation, national security, for example. Would you both agree that the U.S. model has been successful? And with that answer, I'd ask you to follow up with, and as we consider updates to the research enterprise, what's been successful? What should be protected?
So thank you.
Either one first.
Dr. Ochoa, would you like to take this one first?
Please go ahead, Dr. Panchanathan.
Thank you. So, Representative Lucas, you are absolutely correct that there is a lot of applied research that happens through the mission agencies. But at the same time, the innovation that is happening and emerging out of the work that is in the various directorates of NSF is also being translated, but not enough is being translated at speed and scale. There are so many innovations that NSF researchers are bringing out. Not all of them are necessarily aligned with the mission agencies either. For example, if you take clean energy technologies, clearly there is opportunity for partnership with the Department of Energy. If you look at Google as an example, in 1994, we had a proposal from 2 graduate students who talked about a digital library project as a proposal. 3-4 years later, and when the final report was submitted on that project, they said we founded the company called Google. Now, here is an example of not even a long-term serendipity-based innovation that is translated into market. There are many, many examples of that. But even in the near term, there are examples like that. These do not necessarily fall under any specific agency because NSF promotes science and technology and engineering talent across all disciplines. And therefore, there is so much of talent and ideas that are out there that are not getting the full attention and investment that is needed so that they can exercise into these thousands and thousands of new companies and ventures and industry products. This is what I think I call strengthening at speed and scale. And we need to do this urgently because when we talk about our competitor, China, we need to make sure that we are taking full advantage of all of these ideas that is emerging out of our research labs so that our competitors don't get hold of those and then build those translational pipeline so that they end up accruing the benefits. This is why it is an all of the above strategy. What's happening in the other agencies? Absolutely. But what is missed right now is what I think we should focus on, in addition to empowering what is already happening, so that we get an unbelievable rate of progress and a scale of progress that is absolutely needed urgently here in our nation.
Maybe it'd be a good point, and I appreciate exactly what you said, but to note, and you can call this an editorial comment if you want, I'm a little concerned about some of the proposals from the Senate and the administration, which call for massive one-time money dumps for technology research and what this might do to our research enterprise over the long haul. Can you both discuss, or either whatever, can you discuss the importance of long-term, sustained, and stable funding for basic research and the damage that volatile funding patterns can do? Just the general principle about why is it important to have stable, consistent, long-term funding streams.
Well, I'll go ahead and I'll talk a little bit about the model and then hopefully that will lead a little bit into funding, and then I'll hand it back to you, Dr. Panchanathan. Just talking about what has made us successful, but perhaps what we've gotten a little bit complacent on, and which is why we are trying to really emphasize this on the board, is number one, our lead in fundamental research is very important. And the way that we carry it out with openness, transparency, where we use constructive peer review. So we're really getting quality science products out. This has been the foundation of innovation and will continue to be so in the future. Second, we have a combination of supporting individual creativity in terms of research, as well as the ability to have these government, university, business partnerships, this whole ecosystem that supports science and engineering. And I think that's a real strength of the US. And then finally, one of our biggest strengths is our people, our diversity of people, of institutions, and of perspectives. And this is one area that we think we have become somewhat complacent. We're not reaching out geographically, demographically, in many ways to bring these people into science and engineering. And we're not just talking at the research and development end, but also the skilled technical workforce that is so important to our economy. So as we look at increased investment in all of this, I think one big key, and I will let Dr. Panchanathan talk more about it, is partnerships. Partnerships, again, across federal agencies, with members of industry, with foundations. And that is one way that you can sort of monitor this funding, the change in funding, is to have other partners who are also investing with you.
Thank you so much. If I could add, I just wanted to say that, whether it is the American Jobs Plan or the FY22 budget request, the legislations that you talk about, Representative Lucas, I cannot agree with you more that sustained long-term funding is important. And that is what I see as how it is being talked about, at least as I see it. But to add to what Dr. Ochoa said, I think at the end of the day, we want the sustainability of many of these initiatives through partnerships. And this is something that I'm a huge fan of, and I've been working hard since taking over this role, is talking to many, many industry counterparts, many foundation counterparts, as well as cities and states, having come from a small state like Arizona, and having seen firsthand what a partnership between a university, the city, the county, the state, and more can do to build robust economic development activities and sustaining things over time. This is an all of government approach and all of partnership-based approach that requires to be put together, in addition to sustained efforts in terms of ensuring that the support is there for not only bolstering our curiosity-driven research, but also ensuring that that research outcome is taken out rapidly at speed and scale for benefit to humanity and society.
I would just note, Chairman, as I yield back the time that's now expired, I don't want to create a situation where we have a feast of resources that create the infrastructure and the expectation then that we cannot sustain and disappoint a generation of researchers. I'm old enough to remember what we did in the effort to go to the moon and how that was almost forgotten by the American public and Congress in the aftermath. Very traumatic for a lot of brilliant people with careers at stake. Yield back, Madam Chair.
Yeah, and it's certainly great and refreshing to be able to talk about investing in our scientific research agenda and responsibly thinking about the plus-ups that we want to make to an agency, an independent federal agency such as the NSF, unlike, unfortunately, some of what we got from the previous administration, which was $500 million cuts here and there. And we saw this obviously to the NSF and to the NIST coming out of the previous White House. So it's a great day when we can talk about funding. And with that, I would like to turn it over to my colleague and friend, Dr. Bill Foster.
So I'm on earlier than I'd anticipated, but I can handle it. Well, as the only PhD physicist and practicing research scientist in Congress, I sort of serve as a lightning rod for the enthusiasms and the concerns of the scientific community. There is obviously a lot of excitement about this point in time when we may be approaching a Sputnik-like moment for a real increase in the budget, but also significant concerns. Even prior to COVID, the House Science Committee was entertaining dueling proposals to double the research and education budgets in this country. And on the campaign trail, President Biden was sort of alternating between advocating for doubling or tripling the scientific research budgets. And in Congress, I see our main challenge right now is to capture this real bipartisan appetite and enthusiasm for a real increase in research budgets. Because, as been mentioned, for the last decade, we have struggled to maintain even NSF budgets and scientific budgets generally that were even flat after inflation. The NSF has a founding document, sort of a spiritual guide, the Endless Frontier Report by Vannevar Bush and others, that has some ageless and wise advice that has really stood the test of time. And in its discussion on industrial research, it leads with a paragraph consisting of a single sentence. And that sentence is, quote, "The simplest and most effective way in which government can strengthen industrial research is to support basic research and to develop scientific talent." Okay, that's worth thinking about that sentence hard and rereading the Endless Frontier Report for those who haven't done it recently. It did not ask Congress to micromanage areas of scientific focus. It did not ask to Congress or really the NSF to pick commercial winners and losers. NSF in our country has benefited tremendously from that clear vision of an agency dedicated to pure scientific research and scientific education, guided by scientists and engineers on advisory councils, such as the National Science Board and OSTP. There is a lot of concern right now about scientists who worry that a new technology directorate or more extreme proposals, along with an increased focus on commercial and applied research, could represent a potentially damaging distraction from NSF's core mission. I'm frankly worried about a future in which you and your successors will be brought before Congress and ask, what products did you bring to market for us this year? When the real answer is that these products will only appear on the market many decades from now. In fact, one of the biggest gifts that Congress could give to China would be to subject the NSF to congressional micromanagement and short-term commercial considerations in our consideration of their budget. There is also the worry among scientists that a new NSF focus on technology and commercialization will overlap in inefficient ways with existing applied and commercial research programs in Department of Energy, NIST, DOD, and elsewhere. I'm sure you both spend a lot of your time trying to deconflict parallel efforts in all the different agencies. And an additional big we have another entity at the table if we stand up a new directorate or a more extreme example of that is being proposed. I'd urge my colleagues to set as their first priority simply delivering on the enthusiasm of an increased budget and trying to repair the damage that's been done by a decade of flat budgets. And then when you've delivered with the properly funding the programs that you very thoughtfully stood up in the last decades, fully fund those, have a look at what has to be changed before deciding that we have to go redesign the whole system. It's performed pretty impressively for the amount of money it's been given. And so the question I'd like to ask is how in Congress can we find out what the practical limits are, how quickly NSF, DOE, NIST, all of the agencies that do scientific research can really absorb a budget increase? I know you are asked every year secretly from Congress, what an unconstrained budget looks like. And by design, we're not allowed to see that. But I was wondering what mechanisms you can, if you're allowed to throw deep and dream big, what are the mechanisms so we could see what the real opportunities are with an unconstrained budget?
Dr. Foster, this is a good question. I think that, we have pondered about this quite a bit at NSF and even in the board, and we have a lot of conversations about this too. So if you look at, let's take the current moment that we have at hand. If you take the 50,000 plus proposals that we receive every year, we fund about 20% on average over the years, average 20%. When I came to the agency, I asked the question, like you, a scientist, I asked the question, what are the proposals that are deemed worthy of funding that we are not funding today? That is, these have been ranked by the panels as these are deemed worthy of funding, but we are yet not funding them. It turns out 1/3 of the proposals on an average again are worthy and thought of as highly competitive or competitive to be funded. But we yet fund only 20%, not 33%. So right there on the chopping room floor, we are leaving unbelievable ideas and therefore what talent that would have generated, all of that on the table. So that's one number.
Right.
The other number, as you might know, as all of you will know, and Chairwoman talked about her own proposal that she submitted like me, and being unsuccessful. I've been unsuccessful with NSF proposals too. So I know the pain. So basically, when you look at the size of the proposal, is this the right size, I asked? Are we funding it at the right size? It turns out that while we marginally increase the size of the proposals, it has not kept up with either the inflation or the rate of increase of graduate student stipends. So right there, you could think that a 50% increase in the size, the grant size, would be more appropriate for what we need to be funding today, at least. Then I asked the next question, are we funding the right duration of these grants? Is it a magical number of X number of years? Now it is, let us say, 2 or 3 to 4 years. Is that the right duration? It turns out that graduate students have a certain time duration for graduation for their PhDs. And so rather than 3 to 4, 4 to 5 may be more appropriate. So again, a 33% increase in duration. If you take today's proposals, today's ideas that are submitted today, and if you were to put these factors into consideration, right there's a doubling of the budget that is required. Right there today. So with not funding NSF at only not 100% of what we need to fund, but only at 50% of what is being funded, we are losing out on great ideas. And guess what? Those ideas are being picked up by our competitors. That is not an acceptable thing. And therefore, we have to change this fast, right at NSF. Okay. Now let's go on and talk about what else we are missing. Now, we founded this fantastic program called ICOR. I was an ICOR PI. I tell you, I went to the boot camp. It transformed me. It transformed me in terms of how I think about my research. So now, how many projects do we fund at ICOR? It turns out 1,500. And how many we have trained through that? 4,500. We have hundreds of thousands, not just thousands we are talking about. We are leaving on the table. This is missed opportunity for turning the entrepreneurial talent into something that benefits our nation. We are leaving it on the chopping room floor. I'm not talking about anything new. I'm talking about existing ideas. Okay, SBR, STTR. We are not funding them at the level that we should be funding. So I would say both curiosity-driven research and use-inspired research needs to be funded at a much higher level. And to give you a thumbnail, we are at least at a tripling or the quadrupling of the NSF budget, which can be accommodated to make that happen today.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. And my apologies to my colleagues for extending my time. Madam Chair, if there is an opportunity for a second round of questioning, if that fits in, I think it would be very productive if possible.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see if we'll do the second round. I hear you loud and clear, and it's very important, I think, to get what Ponch is putting on the record for us into that congressional record. We're not in the committee room, but this is still a part of the House record, this hearing, and part of this testifying and the process that we're undertaking here is exactly how we're going to shape this. And I think our dialogue is just going very nicely. So with that, it's a real honor to recognize my colleague, Congressman Peter Meyer from the western part of Michigan for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you to our distinguished panelists here today. I'm Peter Meyer, representing Michigan's 3rd District. So as the Chairwoman alluded to, in Michigan, we are defined by our natural boundaries. We're defined by our Great Lakes. And not only does that make us much more in touch with and understanding on some of the environmental pressures and constraints, but also appreciative of all of the scientific research that has gone in to helping us protect and preserve and grow our understanding of that ecosystem. So I guess, Dr. Panchanathan, I really appreciate your enthusiasm and energy, and I think there is a wide share among this committee and a subcommittee in a bipartisan way on that need, which is indeed why we're here today. But I just want to drill in a little bit on the Great Lakes, if I could more specifically. So obviously the NSF is just one part of the overall research ecosystem. We also have the Department of Energy, the national labs, NIST, NASA, to name a few other civilian research agencies. I'm going to get into the Great Lakes in a second, but could you talk a little bit more about the NSF's relationships with these other agencies and how you kind of see and value your interagency partnerships?
Thank you very much for the question. I often say that if you open up my body and look at my DNA, or even don't have to open my body, take a blood sample, look at my DNA, it will scream partnerships, 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 collaboration, collaboration, collaboration. And I'm not just saying it for words. My actions speak louder than words. My past life in Arizona, you would have seen that partnerships is something that I fostered of every form and every type. So what did I do when I got into the agency in July? The first couple of weeks, I picked up the phone and talked to every agency leader. And I said, I want us to partner stronger, better, in larger initiatives, as well as continue to, fuel the smaller initiatives that we are partnering in, every one of them. Just 2 weeks ago, I picked up the phone and I asked for a call with Secretary Granholm from the Department of Energy as another example, and said, how might Secretary be my partner more between Department of Energy and NSF? Because there's a lot of things that we partner on, facilities, projects, a whole host of things, AI, quantum, we partner on many, many things. And therefore, how might we leverage this and build even more sustained partnerships and broader partnerships for the future? So this is something that I deeply value. You said, I deeply, deeply value, because as a government, all of government approach, we need to make sure that we need to not have any duplication of efforts, but instead synergization and scaling up of efforts because of partnership. But I didn't stop even there. I went beyond agencies, industry, foundations, etc. So I cannot agree with you more that partnerships is the way that you achieve rapid progress at speed and scale. So I yield the time to Dr. Ochoa.
Right. Well, and thank you, Director. And I wanted to dive in a little bit more there, and specifically, I didn't mention these prior, but other scientific agencies. You have NOAA, the USGS. Could you speak to your experience in working with them, and specifically any research that NSF has supported on the Great Lakes more broadly?
Absolutely. I mean, I may not have specific to the Great Lakes. I can give you the examples, and we will be happy to respond to your specific question there. But in the broader context of NOAA and USGS partnerships, absolutely. In fact, when I picked up the phone and talked to the previous NOAA leader when I came in, as well as USGS leader, I told them, why not work on an AI institute focused on the areas that NOAA is interested in and USGS is interested in. USGS, the leader said to me that, we have lots of data. We collect a lot of data, and it'll be great to have the NSF partnership because you guys know what to do with data. In other words, your researchers know what to do with data and glean useful information from that. So I said, bring it on. Let's build a strong partnership so that your data and our researchers, because our researchers, as a data researcher myself, we all salivate for data at large scale. Therefore, there are researchers out there salivating for the data. Wouldn't this be great if we bring the two together? And so you can be rest assured that we are developing the partnerships with respect to Great Lakes. I will make sure that we get the information and data to you in concrete form.
Thank you, Director. And you mentioned also the industry partnerships. I just wanted to say in fiscal year 2020, NSF invested over $4.5 million in Michigan startups through the small business program. So I'm hopeful that will be continued and expanded because, again, I'm glad to hear that you very much feel partnerships is in your DNA and appreciate that we don't want to have duplication of effort, but want to make sure we're all rowing in the same path. So I really appreciate your time today. And Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you.
Excellent. And with that, we're going to recognize Congresswoman Moore for 5 minutes of questions from the other Great Lakes state of Wisconsin.
Well, thank you so much, Madam Chair. I'm Zoom, these Zoom days, you Zoom from meeting to meeting, but I did have a chance to listen to our outstanding guests today. And really, like I said, I'm going to have a PhD in science before I leave this committee. But that being said, the NSF is such a valuable resource to us. And I know that there's discussion around reaching out to more minority students by going to HBCUs, Hispanic serving institutions, and making those recruits. But I do have a question about other interventions. You do have cities like Milwaukee or Chicago or Detroit and big cities that have a lot of urban African Americans who don't necessarily have access to HBCUs in their region, and we need to make sure we don't leave them out as well. Also, there are STEM programs in some of our community colleges that we need to make sure that we don't limit our reach so that we miss out on where the greatest number of these students might exist instead of working sort of around the edges of the problem. We all know that the lack of equity in STEM interests, whether it be based on race or gender, starts much earlier than arguing whether you need to go to an HBCU to find these kids or whether you need to go to the University of Michigan to find them. And so I'm just wondering to our witnesses what the NSF is doing specifically to make those interventions to very low income students and women K through 12. Younger the better.
So I this time I'm going to make it short so that I have my colleague to have a chance to also weigh in. So excellent question. Thank you so much for asking that. You know, you're absolutely correct. Talent and ideas are everywhere across our nation. It is our responsibility to ensure that we are inspiring, motivating, and bringing the talent to life. NSF is involved in a range of programs, and I can go through all the details and we can even respond to you more concretely on this offline. But I will tell you that our K to 12, you're absolutely correct. Our K to 12 kids need to be inspired to not only take STEM as what they might do in their careers or in what they do post their K to 12 program, but also the STEM spirit and the STEM spark being lit, even if they didn't pursue STEM, that they are going to somehow have this, association with STEM or be impacted by STEM and have an appreciation for STEM. So at NSF, we are working on various projects and programs to do this. And one of the major ways in which we do this is how might we inspire them by having science teachers who inspire the kids. And therefore having the teachers at scale who are scientifically inspired by themselves, therefore inspiring the children in turn, is something that we are focused on. And we are working with, in partnership with, seeking partnership with foundations to do that at scale so that we might have it everywhere across our nation. We have many programs with HBCUs, other MSIs, tribal colleges, universities, as well as HSIs. And I'm going to pass the baton off to Dr. Ochoa because the board has been doing some deep thinking about this and assembling panels. So I would like Dr. Ochoa to highlight that too.
Well, thank you. It's absolutely a question that the board is very interested in and concerned about. And just in general, we've focused on a variety of these issues just in the last year at our meetings, where we've had external panels on the Black experience in STEM, on barriers to student retention in STEM. And next month in May, we're going to have a panel on lessons learned from minority serving institutions on retaining students in STEM. And I would invite you to tune into that. A couple things that I can think of. First, NSF does support research on STEM and how you best teach it and reach out to it. And we would like to see broader use of that. And secondly, they do get involved in outreach to a wide variety of ages. And there's one program I actually became familiar with when I was at NASA, although it was NSF funded, a program called Sci Girls, which is hosted by middle school girls of a variety of demographics, is shown on public education stations. And they actually act as hosts and introduce students of their age to STEM topics. They came to Johnson Space Center when I was director there, and one of our younger Latina engineers took them on a tour, and I got to make a guest appearance. So absolutely, NSF also looks at how can we reach out at a younger age and get students interested in STEM.
Thank you so much. Like I said, equity is really important for African Americans, Latinos, Asians, and women as well. And so, if we're going to be really intentional about this, we have to go everywhere. And so, like I said, I applaud going to HBCUs. I didn't go to an HBCU, and whether I have regrets about that don't even matter. I'm an alumna of Marquette University, grateful for my education, but know that my constituency needs some love as well. So with that, thank you, Madam Chair, for your indulgence. My Zoom jumping, and I yield back.
Thank you. You couldn't be more spot on. And with that, we're going to recognize Dr. Jim Baird for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for mentioning our early work in the 116th Congress. And I want to thank Ranking Member Waltz and everyone for holding this hearing. And I really always learn something in the Science Committee, and I appreciate the witnesses and they're sharing their perspectives on the importance of research and innovation and the National Science Foundation. And I just want to mention, as the other PhD scientist in Congress, I'm very supportive of research and development, Dr. Foster. Anyway, and I really recognize the significance of basic research and how a long-term commitment that is, because what you're doing in basic research today may not materialize until somewhere down the road because of other basic research when they all come together. But I would mention that in addition to what NSF does with other agencies, there's also a great deal of work that's done with academia. Purdue University is in my district, and they utilize NSF grants to fund basic student research. Just last week, I spoke to several materials engineering students whose work has been funded through the NSF. So my question is, how do we really measure the success and value of these academic grants? And then how successful are we at retaining these students to remain as STEM leaders? But I'm particularly interested in keeping them in the US. So I guess Dr. Panchanathan, you might start with this question, and then we'll go to Dr. Ochoa.
Thank you very much, Representative Baird. In terms of assessing the value of these projects, clearly, every project has, at the end of the term, as you rightly pointed out, we need to ensure that curiosity-driven research is given the opportunity to exercise the ideas that people have into unbelievable outcomes from a scientific perspective, not necessarily from a tangible all the time in terms of looking for an outcome which is measured by either a company coming out or a product coming out. Definitely not. So typically all these projects that we fund, they submit annual reports, and in the annual reports they outline two things: those things that are manifested in terms of the intellectual merit with which the proposal was submitted and funded, and also the other component called broader impacts, and how did their work impact a broader set of objectives that they laid out in their proposal. So we ensure that these reports are capturing all the amazing outcomes that are achieved through the intellectual progress that they make with their scientific explorations, as well as the broader impacts they also create because of what they do in their proposal and their project. So we ensure that is captured through this reporting process, and that is something that is submitted on an annual basis, and an end of the project report is also typically gathered. And we make sure that we harvest the information from that, which is very valuable for us to be able to dice and slice it to understand all the amazing impact that NSF is creating across the nation in various regions and beyond. So that's something that we do in terms of evaluating the progress.
I'll just add a couple of things. First, I'll draw your attention to a report that the board puts out in conjunction with the National Center for Science and Engineering Statistics, which of course is housed within NSF, which provides the latest data and trends on higher education, STEM degrees, STEM workforce, as well as the industries that it supports in the United States. And so that is one way to understand the trends and what's making a difference. There's also some programs that NSF has that are really trying to incorporate impact metrics. So not just the number of people, for example, that were reached out to, but there's a program within the tribal colleges and universities that are looking at what is the actual number of STEM degree programs that have been developed through this support. And a few years ago, NSF initiated some pilot programs on metrics, one of which includes, the long-term outcomes of people who get the graduate research fellowships through NSF. And they're also looking at a framework for doing the same thing for participants of their undergraduate research experience that they fund. So understanding, what is making a difference for these students and helping that evolve programs that NSF supports is certainly something both of interest to NSF and the board.
To the second part of the question that you asked, Dr. Baird, if I could address that, how do we keep them here in the US? Again, this cross-cut idea that we have right now in place will even more train them to be aligned with what the society and industry is interested in turning their ideas and giving them experiential opportunities that then makes them ready for jobs right here, so that they might then be retained here because they have the opportunities to continue to express their talent as they move forward.
Thank you. And thank you, Madam Chair, for letting me run over a little bit, but I'm out of time.
Anything for my colleague from Indiana. With that, I'd like to recognize Mr. Connor Lamb for 5 minutes of questioning.
Hey, thank you to our guests for joining us today. Really appreciate all the information. I really just have one main question, which is that where I come from in Pittsburgh, we have this heritage of being an important location of R&D and industrial innovation, not only because of our great universities, but we were actually a powerful center of corporate R&D, particularly Westinghouse Corporation, but U.S. Steel and PPG and others as well. And it seems like that is dropping off in America in terms of overall investment in corporate R&D. We looked at the total amount of applied R&D spent last year, and only around 6% was corporate funded. So I was just curious, do either of you think that there is more that we can do to encourage corporate R&D? How do you think we're doing vis-a-vis our competitor nations? Or is it that this is the reason that the government needs to be more directly involved in applied research because corporations in the global market just can't afford it? Just any thoughts that you have on that?
Representative Lamb, when I came into the agency, when I outlined the vision, one of the component parts of the vision, when we talked about this technology and translation and so on, is this concept of what Bell Lab-like entities, where we had public-private partnership, people seamlessly integrating between academic world as well as the industry world, all working together. And I call them innovation accelerators. You can call them whatever you want, innovation hubs. That everywhere across the nation, we need to build these innovation hubs. So what happens is the melding of the ideas, the mutual influence of the ideas, and further fostering that. And then the talent that gets exposed to this ecosystem becomes very sensitized to that way of thinking. So which means that they are even more ready for the workforce and the entrepreneurial outcomes that we can achieve through that talent. All of that can be made possible through the fusion. So when we talk about this cross-cut directorate idea, you can think of such hubs being in every part of our nation, because we said talent and ideas are in every part of our nation. For example, if you take a rural environment where agriculture is predominant, you could imagine building a cluster around the smart agriculture and what might be a better live-in laboratory than a smart agriculture in a rural area or in a state.
As you're saying, it has to be that we get multiple entities basically under the same roof and not the old model of the Westinghouse Corporate Research Development Park or something like that. Yeah.
It's a consortium-like thinking. You're absolutely correct. How might we bring interested parties all together so that we can have this innovation hubs where these innovations can rapidly then speed up and scale? And that's required across our nation. This is exceedingly important. And that's why I'm excited with the American Jobs Plan, the FY22 budget proposal by the president. I'm very excited by all the legislative efforts, including the NSF for the Future Act, because all of this are communicating the importance of us doing this effort of translating rapidly so that we might be in the vanguard of innovation and take full advantage of the unbelievable spirit of curiosity-driven research already existent, but also influencing more of that at scale because of what
Ochoa, did you have anything you wanted to add on that?
I thought I'd just add an example that was in fact just announced this week. So this is an NSF-led multi-sector partnership on accelerating research on the next generation of communications networks and systems. So NSF is leading it. It involves NIST, DoD, but then several large companies. And this is NSF's largest single effort to date to engage public and private partners to jointly support a research program. And I think this is exactly the kind of thing that Dr. Panchanathan is pushing in a whole variety of areas, where NSF, which is really focusing on the basic research part, but it's forming these connections with other more mission-driven agencies, and then of course the actual industries who will go into the more development area while NSF is doing the basic research part.
Got it. Well, I appreciate both of you helping shine a light on this for us and letting us know the ways that we can help improve, because this is obviously needs to be at the top of our agenda for innovation and economic development and jobs going forward. So really appreciate it. Madam Chairwoman, I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Lamb. And with that, I'd like to recognize Mr. Gonzalez for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Chairwoman Stevens and Ranking Member Waltz, for holding this timely hearing, and to our distinguished witnesses for joining us. Dr. Ponch, it's great to see you again. According to a report from the Federation of American Scientists, the U.S. spent $134 billion on R&D in 2020. As a percentage of GDP, that's 0.6%, so roughly a 50% decrease from 1976 spending levels. Comparatively, China's spending on R&D has climbed in recent decades, reaching $378 billion last year, so nearly 2.4% of their GDP. So we're being outspent in that regard, and they're also very well focused with respect to how they allocate their dollars. And so one area I want to start with, Dr. Ponch, and Ms. Ochoa, it's great to see you as well. I know Dr. Ponch a little better, so I don't feel left out. But in any event, I want to start specifically on quantum and quantum technologies. Dr. Ponch, as you know, China is aggressively recruiting U.S. researchers and scientists to grow their knowledge base and accelerate their timeline for quantum technologies. My concern is if China were to get their hands on a quantum computer that can break today's mathematical encryptions, it would put our country's IP, personal data, and mission-critical systems more at risk than they already are. To that end, what steps is the NSF taking to expand quantum technology and ensure the U.S. maintains the advantage in converting research into commercial applications?
Thank you so much, Mr. Gonzalez. Again, good to see you too. So, as you know, NSF is very, very invested in quantum, not today, but for several decades. And in multiple disciplines of investments that is shaping the quantum revolution as we are talking about it today. Whether it is, the physics of quantum or quantum information science or the engineering, all aspects of quantum sensing, all aspects are have been invested in by NSF over decades. So has also been the investments by other agencies. So that this is, again, one of those areas where many different agencies can come together. Most importantly, industry, leading industry, like, for example, IBM, coming together in partnership so that we might accelerate the progress at a speed that is much greater than what we would be able to do by just ourselves working. But having said that, NSF has got tremendous investments. Last year, for example, we launched the Quantum Institutes in partnership with DOE. That's a great platform for ensuring that we are able to support the researchers coming together from multiple parties, not only academia, labs, and industry and others working together so that we might build the fastest computers, quantum computers, the fastest quantum information science ideas, and the fastest, therefore, fundamental research that still needs to happen in quantum so that we might unleash the future of what we need to do with quantum. So we are doing all of that at the same time. And I can tell you here is where industry partnerships are exceedingly vital. And again, that plays to this cross-cut idea that we talk about in technology is because that's where we will bring the science in partnership with industry and therefore make this rapid translations possible. Lastly, we need an entrepreneurial ecosystem around this to be developed so that we might have those good ideas quickly translated.
And then specifically to how we compare relative to China in terms of development, do you feel like we're ahead of them on quantum? We're neck and neck? I mean, just if it's a straight horse race, I mean, how do we compare specifically to them in your eyes?
So it's very difficult to go in and say where we are, in this race, but we are competing. But I can tell you one part of this, which is the good news. In the last, again, 9 months that I've been in the job, I have pretty much reached out and talked to many of our partners across the globe. Let's say Canada, for example. Canada is investing heavily in quantum. How might we find like-minded partners who share in our values, who share in our research integrity and trust and reciprocity? That is, we are building a coalition of like-minded partners across the globe so that we can leverage our investments together to make even more rapid progress. So that's how not only leapfrogging with our investments, but also further leapfrogging with the ability to be able to channel the other partnership resources that we can bring to bear. I want Dr. Ochoa also to have a chance to respond to this.
The only couple things I would add is in quantum, as in other areas, I think the two things we really want to take advantage of are this broad ecosystem where you have the government and particularly NSF, which has this broad and deep reach into all the higher education institutions across the country, marrying that up with industry, and then making sure that we're always thinking about how do we reach out and get talent? How do we unleash the talent in the country? And keeping both of those in mind, I think, is where we are going to really be able to continue to push our success.
Yeah, thank you. And before I yield back, the one thing I want to highlight that you just said, we also need to attract and retain talent, and that's going to require some immigration reform, which I hope we can finally get to in a sensible way. So with that, I yield back.
My mouse on my house computer has given out, so I'm using the space bar. But great concluding statement from my colleague from Ohio, and maybe we can delve into that at a separate time. So after we've just heard from many fantastic colleagues from the Great Lakes area, Indiana, Wisconsin, Michigan, Ohio, we're now going to turn to one of our newest members of the subcommittee, the great Deborah Ross from North Carolina. Congresswoman, go ahead.
Well, thank you for your leadership, Chairwoman and Ranking Member. And this is such an important hearing. For me, I represent the Research Triangle area in North Carolina. North Carolina State University, land-grant university is in my district, and I have two HBCUs, Representative Moore, Shaw University, and St. Aug's. Before I get started, I need to brag a little bit on one of our professors from North Carolina State who's currently on sabbatical at NSF, Dr. Christine Grant. And my question is going to piggyback on some of the questions that we just got, because Dr. Grant won an NSF Presidential Award for Excellence in Science, Mathematics, and Engineering Mentoring, both at the undergraduate level and at the graduate level. And in 2018, the National Academies released a report calling for modernized approach to graduate STEM education that's more student-centered. And among the recommendations in the report was a call for a renewed focus on mentoring. This, showing that student how they could become this outstanding researcher, or connecting them to whatever their next steps would be. And so my question to both of you, and maybe we've talked a lot about this in the minority community and with women, but I think this is really across the board. People need to have that human connection. So what steps can NSF take to advance research on effective practices for mentoring graduate students, to incentivize institutions and researchers to place a stronger emphasis on this critical role?
Thank you so much, Dr. Ochoa. Do you want to take this one first?
Sure. Well, first of all, we absolutely share your emphasis on mentoring. We've heard about it from some of our outside panels, particularly ones that address student retention in STEM, and particularly those who are underrepresented. One of the things that Dr. Panchanathan mentioned earlier was hopefully the opportunity to increase award size and duration of grants. And one of the benefits is principal investigators can spend less time generating lots of proposals, more time not only doing the research, but mentoring their students that they have. And I also recently had the opportunity to participate in a National Academies podcast on the science of mentoring, which they put out in conjunction with a report that they've just done, which is quite interesting on, tactics for mentoring. So what we would like to see, for example, when you think about the broader impacts that are reviewed as part of proposals, absolutely building up your own student cohort as a principal investigator is one of those things that can qualify as that, because you're really again, reaching out and trying to develop the talent of the next generation. And so as a board, we're really talking about mentoring, and we're talking with NSF about where are those areas where they could place more emphasis on mentoring as well. And certainly in the broader impacts, that is one area that's a possibility.
Thank you. Do you want to add in? Yeah, go ahead.
If it's okay, I'll just say a few words. This time I will be the one that adds a little bit. So, clearly, all of we have all received NSF grants to know that mentoring is probably the most important thing that you do in terms of talent, how you make sure the talent is expressed in the best possible form. And so one of the things that we need to build more, in complementing Dr. Ochoa's answer, is how do we build role models? Because mentorship is also about who you are. And therefore, I'll give you one example of a program, the Includes program of NSF, right? We want to make sure, or the Advanced program of NSF, we want to make sure that if we want to change the demographic of the population that we have today, we need role models like Dr. Ochoa, who's a fantastic role model, So how do we get more role models like that? And so some of the projects that we're working on and programs that we're working on is to fund people so they might serve not only the mentoring part of what the grant requires, but by who they are, they therefore inspire and get talent much more diversified. And this is something NSF is increasingly focusing on, because you can't build a broad pool of talent unless you have a broad pool of mentors also being supported at the same time. So we are looking at both of them here. And in general, I will say, to many of the previous answers even, there are significant gaps that are there still. And that's one of the things that we are looking at NSF. What might we do better? Whether it is in this realm of how might we do better mentoring? How can we be more diversity and oriented focus and enriching that? How might we get more technology translation? How might we get speed of translation? All of these things are all that we're discussing today are gaps that are yet to be filled. And that's why we need a different way of thinking about all of these things. And that's why this movement that is very important through all of these proposals that are being made, I think is very rich for our nation. This is what we need in order for us to be able to compete and outbeat and out-innovate other competitors like China.
Yep. Well, thank you very much. I see I'm out of time, but while Dr. Grant's working with NSF, I encourage you to get to know her. She's an outstanding person and has done so much at NC State. Thank you, Madam Chair, and I yield back.
Excellent questions. Thank you so much, Congresswoman Ross. And with that, we've got Congressman Beyer here for 5 minutes of questions. I will turn it over to you, sir.
Thank you, Madam Chair, very much. And thank you to Dr. Pons, Dr. Ochoa, for being distinguished and testifying before us today. I'm a big fan of the National Science Foundation because it's a couple of blocks from my home in Duke Street, and I have thousands of these hardworking scientists and staff living in the district. And I really value the tremendous benefit the agency has brought to America and Americans over the past 70 years. So I'm really committed with all of my colleagues on this committee to make sure that the National Science Foundation has the funding we've heard. In the 7 years I've been on the Science Committee, we continue to hear about the dwindling percentage of excellent applications that can be approved because the money just hasn't kept up. And anything we can do, I know there's the NSF for the Future Act, there's the Endless Frontiers Act. My dear friend and respected colleague, Bill Foster, among others, has made sure that we are looking deep into the challenges of the respective acts. And Madam Chair, I'd love to include an unanimous consent to enter into the record 2 letters, one from the National President of the American Federation of Government Employees, AFG Everett Kelly, and another one from David Verardo, who's the president of the National Science Foundation, AFG chapter, expressing concerns about some of the special hiring authorities that are included in the NSF for the Future Act. And I'm sure we can work together with the committee to iron these out.
So moved. So moved.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Dr. Pons, one of our responsibilities on the committee is to elevate the role of evidence-based policy debates and decision-making. It wouldn't be going too far to say that talking about evidence-based and truth-based policy is one of the great national divides right now. And federal agencies have this trove of survey and administrative data that, if made accessible to researchers, would greatly advance evidence-based policymaking. So a couple of years ago, the U.S. Commission on Evidence-Based Policymaking recommended modernizing the federal data infrastructure by establishing a national secure data service And the Data Foundation subsequently decided that the best place to put this thing would be at the National Science Foundation. What's your view on this approach, and has NSF taken any steps towards establishing a national secure data service?
Representative Baird, as you know, Dr. Ochoa talked about the fact that we have this fantastic National Center for Statistics that is extremely valuable in terms of taking the data and being able to come out with glean some interesting insights from the data. To the specific data resource that you're pointing out, I've not had a chance, and I'm not privy to that yet, but I'm happy to look into that and get my comments more in an informed way, rather than making a general statement of, well, the data resource can be valuable. Instead of making such a statement, I would rather like to go and look into it and then get back to you on that, if that's okay with you.
That sounds great, Dr. Punch. And Dr. Ochoa, there's been a big emphasis in recent years on supporting public-private partnerships and making sure that NSF funding is linked to private sector commercialization, society and societal problems. But I confess, I'm also just deeply fascinated by how the commitment to basic research that's not connected to any short-term goal in our lives ends up changing our lives in major ways. As head of the National Science Board, can you just talk about the fundamental importance of basic research?
Oh, absolutely. And of course, the board shares that value. That's really why we're all on the National Science Board. And as Dr. Panchanathan has mentioned, there's no sort of hard cutoff between curiosity-driven research and use-inspired research. It's really more of a continuum. I used to kind of think of it as a feedback loop. He likes to think of it, and I like this analogy too, as the strands of DNA that are really completely intertwined. And just one example, going back to COVID, is Dr. Panchanathan mentioned the COVID tests that people are taking now, the PCR, polymerase chain reaction tests. That was developed based on basic research looking at bacteria in the thermal pools at Yellowstone National Park. And it turned out these bacteria had enzymes that could replicate genetic material. And it's now led to a process that allows you to replicate genetic material taken from swabs from people and allows this kind of testing to go on, which has been so critical in the last year. So that research was decades ago. I don't think anybody thinking about exploring the thermal pools of Yellowstone would have predicted the future, but that is exactly what NSF is in the business of supporting. We do, however, as a board, believe we can do even more. Go from what we like to say from imagination to impact. How can we even better impact people's lives and really carry out the mission of NSF? As it was stated in 1950, promote the progress of science and advance the nation's health, prosperity, and welfare.
Thank you very much. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Absolutely wonderful. Well, thank you so much. We had a request from Dr. Foster to do another round of questions, but what I'd like to do is close out the hearing, because we are doing another hearing with stakeholders next week. Bill, what I'll do is we can leave, and the committee can oblige this, because it's just like if we're in the hearing room. We'll leave the Zoom link open so we can chit chat. We're gonna, and because I think there's some more here for, it doesn't need to be on the record, but some catch up stuff. The for the record stuff, as Dr. Ponch alluded and said several times directly, which is, hey, we'll get back to you at a deeper level. There was a request from Mr. Waltz to Dr. Ochoa for additional information, particularly on the security agenda. So we'll utilize the record here. I mean, our purpose for this hearing, and it's a very serious endeavor, is to capture this for the House record as a springboard for what we're going to do going forward. We had just an incredible and robust discussion. You can tell how special it is to be on the Science Committee, in part because we've got certainly a lot of vibrancy from the Great Lakes area and participation and members from across the Great Lakes region, but also across the entire country. And we here are are meddling on and discussing with you and asking and inquiring the questions of how we move our scientific research agenda forward for the purposes of jobs, of economic development, and to what the great Gwen Moore asked, Congresswoman Moore, our equity agenda and bringing in populations across the country to industries of scale. Particularly, we see this in the digital space with IoT, $1 trillion industry. How do we make sure that there's jobs for everyone and inclusion for everyone? How do we make sure that our scientific community is diverse and inclusive of our African American population, our Hispanic population, our Native American populations, just as we're considering this for rural America, suburban America, and on. And so I can't thank our witnesses enough. Your careers are so admirable. You in of yourself, each of you, are just such inspirations. And we look forward to continuing to work together very closely as we move forward our legislation and get this done. And we will be having a markup as well as after our next hearing takes place, which is we're going to hear from the stakeholders next week as well. And certainly the dedication of our members who participated here today. So with that, the record's going to remain open for 2 weeks. All right. So we're going to have a 2-week period for additional statements and questions, QFRs, questions for the record of our witnesses. And with that, I'm going to gavel us out. And the witnesses are technically excused, but I think we can stay on for a little chit chat if we want to do that, sidebar conversations, just as if we were in the great hearing room that we have in Rayburn. We can't wait to get back there. We got some wonderful quotes from Tennyson and Proverbs on the wall that guide us. We need a vision for the future. That's what we're doing here today. Thank you. This hearing is adjourned.